Hello my colouring friends, welcome back. I'm Liv and this is Colouring with Liv, and in this video I'll be colouring the polar bear page in Lulu Mayo's A Million Cute Animals. And I decided to do a soft pastel background and I wanted it to be all blue, so using different blues. And you can either use the soft pastel directly on the page, or you can scratch it off and then use that powder to rub it in. Or you could also grab the soft pastel with a cotton bud and then layer it on that way, but that's a lot longer. So I felt like the easiest and quickest way was just to layer it on directly onto the page. And I broke all my pastels in half because I felt like it was easier to control. And then I blended it all out with the cotton bud, and you don't want to blow the powder either because that will create a big mess, and you want to save that chalky powder to sort of try and get that colour into the page. So you can also use your finger like I did, but I decided not to use my finger at first because sometimes I feel like the oils from your hand can create like a weird residue, but I decided to use my finger once that main bit of colour would like sunk into the page to kind of create a nice base, and to get the rest of the colour in I just used my finger. And before moving on to the next step, I wish I had added a little bit more of that deeper, darker blue in the centre of the page to give it a little bit more depth, but I didn't do that. So that's what I would have changed. So I swatched out some of the Crayola markers and I kept it in order in the case, because the Crayola markers, they don't have any numbers attached to them, so it's quite difficult to see what colour it is just from the lid. A lot of the time it does seem to be a different colour, so that's how I've arranged it like that. And even though it almost feels like the case itself might cost as much as the Crayola markers, but I find that it's the best way to store them. For this colouring, I decided to do the Crayola markers on top of the soft pastels. So to see what that would look like, I needed to actually swatch out some of the pastel and layer that Crayola marker on top to see what that would look like. Because when I looked at my swatches and I felt like, okay, yeah, that's the colour I want to use, but if I'm putting it on a different colour, then it's going to change it. So I needed to have a look quickly in my sketchbook to see exactly what colour I would go for. And in the end, I ended up going for a different colour, because at first I was going to go for that lightest blue or lightest grey for the polar bears, but then I decided to go a little bit darker. And then for the whales, I was thinking about going for a black, but I decided to go for more of a darker blue. So yeah, it's worth always swatching out your colours before you get started. And even though I didn't want to erase the whole of the animal before adding that marker, I did want to erase around the snowflake because I wanted to keep the snowflake white. So I wanted to either just erase that bit, but because the illustration was quite small, I kind of almost created a bit of a glow around it. So more pressure around, like on the illustration itself, and then lighter pressure around it, kind of like a circular motion. And in this video I decided to film from a different perspective. I haven't filmed from this perspective before, so let me know what you think of it. Maybe I'll do it again like this, because I guess it's easier to do just the straight top down, but this view is slightly from the side, so let me know what you think of it. Do you like this view? Does it help you see anything better? So as I was laying down the Crayola marker, I noticed that there were some lines and I didn't quite like that, so I decided to add some water to kind of smoothen that all out, because these markers are water based. And recently I've been using some alcohol markers that were gifted to me by Les Géants des Beaux-Arts. So it's a Winsor Newton alcohol markers, the brush tip, and they just blended out so beautifully. But I decided to use these water-based markers. Why? Because alcohol markers go through the page and you have to sacrifice the other side of the page, so that's why I decided not to use alcohol markers here. And when I do have some other water-based markers, but my Crayola markers have such a wide variety of colours, and I wanted to play around with one colour of blue. So the most amount of colours that I had was from my Crayola markers. So I have the 100 set plus the Pastel set. And I wanted to see what would happen if I grabbed the ink straight, like directly from that tip. Would it work like watercolour pencils where the ink would just beautifully come out? But with these Crayola markers, I found that it almost felt like it was drying out that tip. So the more water I put on it, the more it felt like, where is the ink going? It almost felt drier. But I did love that technique. I couldn't use it too much, and it kind of made me think, are more expensive water-based markers, can they handle that technique? Because I noticed when I had a look at the price of the Winsor & Newton Pro Marker brush, that they were actually cheaper than the water-based markers, and it made me think, is that the reason why they're more expensive? Because they can handle this technique? I don't know. Do you own any higher end water-based markers? I would love to know if that works well. Have you tried this technique? So this was quite a fun little technique to do. I loved how the watercolor effect turned out, and just using that one color, how it turned into almost two colors or even three. By adding the water, it looks a lot lighter, and on top of the pastels, over the top of those two colors, you get a darker and lighter blend. So that was quite fun. And towards the front of that illustration, where the polar bears are showing their tummies, I thought it would be a good opportunity to use that technique of lifting that ink from the tip of the marker and seeing how that would look like. So even though I used a kind of uniform colour over the rest of it, and I decided to change it up kind of here and there by using that lifting technique of with the ink and making it lighter. So what I would say is, don't be afraid to try something new in your colouring. I'm always trying to experiment with different things as much as I can, because if I don't try, then I'm never going to learn, right? And then I decided to add a little bit of something to the background. So for that, I decided to use some watercolour pencils, just to kind of, because it looked quite flat and it felt like it needed a little bit of something to the page. So I thought just like a swirly motion, because yeah, that soft pastel, I felt like it could have been deeper in colour, a lot darker, and I was thinking I could go over that maybe with coloured pencil, but because I was adding this kind of watercolour effect, that's when I thought, why not use a bit of watercolour pencil and see how that looks. So the page isn't looking too bad, but I felt like it still needed a little bit of something, so that's when I decided to add some coloured pencils. So I use polychroma, so that's what I used here. So I was focusing on the shadows, so a little bit of shadow underneath the polar bear's head, kind of where the neck is, and then just the general edges, just to kind of lift him up off the page a little bit so he doesn't blur into the background that much. I didn't really add any colour to the whales. I didn't feel like it needed it, but because the polar bears were lighter, I felt like it needed a little bit of something, and I bought these full set of polychromas for this reason, so that you can match it to any colour. So that's what I did here. So that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching till the end. Alright, see you in the next one. Bye.